Good evening. We're going to call this meeting to order. Madam Secretary, do we have a quorum?
Mr. Contreras,
Want to do
Present.
Guanajuato Webb, Ms. Guanajuato Webb.
Present.
Mr. Mesa,
Here.
oh, Mr. Oberfeld,
Present.
Ms. Sanders,
Here.
Mr. Smith, and me. We have a quorum,
Thank
except
you.
for Mr. Smith is.
I'm calling this special budget workshop / meeting, regular meeting to order. This meeting has been duly called, and notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. At this time, we'll do opening ceremonies. We'll have a moment of silence for personal reflection, and then do the Pledge of Allegiance. And we're going to change the order of the agenda a little bit. We're going to go into our regular session first, so we can take care of the regular items on the agenda. This time, if we could please stand.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Then we are now going to go into business and finance, which is item number 13 on the agenda. Consideration to approve the 2019 Valverde County Appraisal District budget. Mrs. Sheedy.
Good evening, President Mesa, school board members, Dr. Rios. It's that yearly time when I come before y'all again with our budget proposed for 2020. Is there any individual questions that y'all have at this time?
I think everyone has a copy of the budget on page 6. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Sheedy?
No, sir.
Do you want to give us any highlights?
The highlights I'd like to point out, we did manage to keep our insurance rates the same. In the proposal that I had sent out, we were proposing an increase because unfortunately every year it goes up. And after that went out, I did get a call from our agent, and our rates will be staying the same for 2020. So that is where we had the savings, because originally we did propose an increase, but with those savings, we were able to not have an increase. One of the other things I'd like to point out on page eight, we increased our maintenance for our fleet. All the vehicles are out of warranty now, so we just add a little bit more in that line item in case we do have something that we need to pay for go wrong with one of the vehicles. On page 10, excuse me, on BIS, that one is increasing, but what we're proposing to do, we're going to have our forms online, so our customers can file for homestead online, over 65, disabled veterans, to try to make it more convenient for our customers. So that's why you're seeing a big increase in that line item. And then on pictometry, on the same page 10, that is decreasing because we're just going to do a flyover on San Felipe Del Rio School District this year.
Any questions from board members? Yes, Ms. Horfeld.
Just a quick question. You talked about putting the forms online. Will the appraisal district run advertising or social media thing to say, hey, everything's out? That way individuals know that?
Yes, that will start in January, and I'm going to have Karen Gleason run some kind of a story telling everybody about that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ms. Chidi, one last question is, can you send me or send us as a board collectively when the appointees come up due for the ones that school district appointed to the appraisal district?
Yes, just so you know, it'll start at the end of 2019.
Okay, thank you.
We do not have a recommendation from administration. My understanding is that this budget there's no increase from the 2018 budget. Then I will entertain a motion for
So move.
approval. Mr.
So moved to
Contreras?
approve.
A second. Mrs. Webb? All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. If we can go now to item 11, curriculum and instruction. Consideration to approve the 2018-2019 on-ramps cooperative program agreement and data sharing agreement between San Felipe de Oro CISD and the University of Texas at Austin Office of Strategy and Policy for the on-ramps dual enrollment program. They teach pre-calculus as a dual credit course. Ms. Gomez.
Yes, sir. Ms. Gomez is a trainee,
Okay.
but I will be presenting. The MOU was sent back to the University of Texas for some corrections, and they apologized and they fixed the corrections. So we will be ready to present for approval today. Are there any questions from our board?
Just a clarification. It is my understanding that throughout the year, either there's one or several meetings in regard to the program itself with representatives from University of Texas.
There's the instructor has continuous conversations with the University of Texas. They have meetings with the students to indoctrinate them into the program.
Are those meetings here?
With the students, yes. As a matter of fact, the first meeting is held here at the SPC with the parents and the students.
Okay. But as far as administration, who administers this program, or who? I know it's at the high school.
Ms. Gomez oversees
Okay.
the needs of the program.
So is she in attendance at that meeting? I just wondered who that person might be.
It would be Ms. Gomez. I was here this year when the meeting was held, and it was a lot of people. I don't want to say that she was here, that she wasn't here. I'd rather ask her. But,
Okay. But it is a program that is utilized widely through the high school.
Yes, sir. It's a popular program.
Okay. Then what is the recommendation of administration?
It is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the on-ramps cooperative program agreement with the University of Texas at Austin, present it, and allow Dr. Rios to sign the agreement.
So this is an ongoing agreement, minor changes to the contract. Any questions from board members? Mr. Overfeld?
This is the same program that we had some questions come about earlier in the year as it related to how it fell on the GPA scale, correct? And we identified some issues, particularly with prerequisites and individuals getting placed in there via the counseling department that didn't meet the prerequisite. So are we going to, or this going around for this year, everyone's been trained in the counseling department that they need to know what the child needs to have in there so that we're not a semester in and kind of go through that same thing again.
I apologize, Mr. Overfeld. When you talked about the issues, I was thinking of that one grievance that the board heard related to this program.
Mm-hmm.
I was not I don't immediately recall the prerequisites for students going into that program. That very well may have been part of it. I just don't want to answer something then be incorrect, but it was the one that we discussed in closed session.
Thanks, sir.
Any further questions? Then, you have heard the recommendation from administration. Is there a motion for approval? Mr. Overfeld, seconded by Ms. Haynes. Okay. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Dr. Rios, my understanding now is we do not have any other items except for closed session.
Yes, sir. And it's the board's wishes. We can return back to the school board workshop, or we can go into closed session and then come back and do the budget workshop. It's all.
I think we should go into closed session at this point. Okay, well, then the time is 6:12. We will now go into closed session. The agenda items that will be on the closed session will be session 551.071, 551.072, 551.073, 551.074, 551.076, 551.082, 551.084, and 551.087 of the Government Code, Texas Open Meetings Act. We're now in closed session. Going to reconvene into open session. No action was taken in executive session. We're down to item 17 on our agenda. Consideration to approve the personnel report to include the following: new hires, district vacancies, retirements, and resignations. Ms. Garcia.
Good evening, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, members of the board. It is the recommendation of the administration for the Board of Trustees to approve the following new hires: Patricia Ojeda, Educational Diagnostician; Mary Frances Pineson, third grade teacher at Buena Vista Elementary; Nolan Pritchard, PE teacher at Del Rio Freshman School; Christine Rodriguez, first grade bilingual teacher at Ruben Chavira Elementary; Jessica Riojas, Spanish teacher at Del Rio Middle School; Daniela Velasco, fourth grade teacher at Ruben Chavira Elementary; and Wilson White, social studies teacher at Del Rio Middle School.
You have heard the recommendation from administration. Is there a motion for approval? Mr. Overfeld, seconded by Ms. Haynes. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. We are down to item 17B, consideration to approve the positions for assistant principals. Ms. Garcia.
Yes, sir. It is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the positions for assistant principals. We have Blanca Rojo, assistant principal at San Felipe Memorial Middle School, and Albert Salinas, assistant principal at Lamar Elementary.
You've heard the recommendation. Is there a motion for approval? Ms. Gonzalez, seconded by Mr. Contreras. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to adjourn the regular portion of the agenda and go into our budget meeting, budget workshop, which is item 3, general fund budget workshop. Ms. Gianacani Valdez.
Good evening, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, board members. Everybody should have a copy of the presentation for tonight, and everyone should have some printouts that were shared at the last board update. And we also have this little packet that we're going to start off with, and it's included right after your TASB salary study tab. These were questions from the TASB salary study meeting. it is? I'm sorry. Okay, perfect, thank you. Again, we'll start off the workshop with questions from the prior meeting.
I'll just make the summary of those questions, and if there's any discussion, then I'll gladly try to explain. One of the first items that the board asked us to provide was the list of stipends. So in 7 pages, we summarized the title of the stipends and gave a number. It's a total of $1.679 million in stipends that we pay. We also have that filed that can be expanded to include the names on there. Of course, it'd be too extensive to print, but we can provide that electronically. I believe one board member asked for it. We can certainly do that. Are there any questions about the stipends?
Board members?
Did everybody find their copies?
It's one of this is R1 and then R2. That was R1.
It's right behind your TASB salary study tab.
Mr. Overfeld?
And I can't remember if I asked it last time or if I said I was going to wait for this one. In the area of stipends, this one's very specific. I know we had at one time we were given a stipend as a recruiting tool for people to come to Blended. There was a signing or a stipend to come over and work at Blended. But when we first launched that school, there wasn't nothing like that was offered. So is there any way to look at a stipend for those who voluntarily decided, I want to come and help that out and got that school going and has started to turn, it's been productive schools. We saw our first graduate several weeks ago from Blended walk the stage there. So I was just curious, so those original employees there who didn't get a stipend for coming over and volunteering for it, but others who came in the past couple of years have been given a stipend. I didn't know if that was something that could be looked at.
Dr. Rios?
We did. Did you need to tell me something?
Well, I want to kind of piggyback on that same note, Dr. Rios, because not only, quite honestly, I'm not in agreement to giving a stipend for someone to go to a hard-to-fill school. However, those that have stuck with the Blended Academy and have been there like since day one, since they have stuck with the school, they've been there. I do believe that those that are currently there should be, if we're going to go that route, maybe be looked at differently and maybe say, you know what, go back and give them a little bit extra somehow because they have stuck with it. They've been there since day one. And what happens is that you give them this, from my point of view, you give them the stipend 1 or 2 years down the road, they move on to another school. So you didn't retain anybody there for that, but for that first and second year. But if you give them there and they stay there, well, then I think we should maybe recognize that, incentivize them for them to stay there, because it is not easy to fill school.
Dr. Rios? Oh, Ms. Gonzalez?
Dr. Gonzalez. The SGLC too, do they get any additional pay for that?
The
That's hard
GLC?
to fill too. Those are hard to teach.
We don't currently have that kind of stipend. We can study a longevity stipend. Say anybody who stays there and continues to stay there more than 3 years, and we can recommend that or recommend a proposal, understanding that it could not be retroactive because legally we can't go back, we cannot compensate for previous year's work, but a longevity stipend to say that if you are in your 3rd year and continue every year after that, we'll certainly work something up and make that scenario to the board, and then see where we go.
What is the current stipend right now for blended? You know, as of today, is it 8,000?
No, sir.
To go?
No, sir. We have a stipend for recruitment for vacancies. With the EIP grant, we were giving a stipend for hard-to-fill campuses. However, the EIP grant is over now. So
Okay.
moving forward, what we have is a recommendation for hard-to-fill areas. This would provide an incentive to continue to remain there. It's a real good idea. We just have to see where it works out with the budget and make a recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, and just because there has been some schools there, teachers that have been there since day one, like Mr. Overfeld has just mentioned, and they stick with it. They've been there, so I think we should give them a little incentive or recognition to stay there, not just to go there 1 or 2 years and then they move someone to another school.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. Because I know, Mr. Overfeld, you were asking about the original stipend that was given? Something a
Yeah,
little bit
I
different?
think under the EIP, that was considered a hard-to-staff school at one point under the EIP. So there was a stipend that was given. But when we originally opened the school, there wasn't anything like that. And some of those individuals who volunteered say, I want to go work it because I think I can make an impact. They've kind of been like, well, I was here from day one and have helped make this succeed. So just something requesting to administration to look at,
Okay.
whether it's in the realm of longevity or something like
Okay.
that.
And I know that I do understand, Mr. Contreras, longevity is what you're asking for.
Exactly.
And administration is going to look into that. Now, Mrs. Gonzalez brought up something else. I think SGLC is something totally different, but were you requesting to look into that, or?
No, I just wondered because I work there, and it's a difficult place to be. Just wondered if they do some stipends there too.
Question?
No, sir, we do not stipend SGLC. It is a different scenario because SGLC is a transition campus, and students are there for 15 days or they're there for 30 days. But it is
A year or two too.
a different type of campus to work at. And make it the wishes of the board. We'll provide a recommendation, and then the board can advise. I don't want to take the position and say we should do one and not the other. It's a difficult position, but they are two different types of campuses.
The only thing is
Yeah.
also that they teach from 6th to 12th grade in those schools. And some stay longer than 15 days. Some can stay the whole term there, depending on the situation with the student.
Okay, so to kind of highlight some of the things that have been said, I know Mr. Overfeld mentioned that it has been very successful, and I'm talking about the blended academy. It has been productive. It's been very successful. And Dr. Rios is going to perhaps look into a longevity pay plan. And I know Mrs. Webb has questions as well.
I have two questions, or one comment and one question. First of all, how many students do we have at blended, and how many students do we have as SGLC throughout the year?
At blended, this coming year, our goal is to be right at 200. This past year, we had approximately, Dr. Garza, can you correct me, 50, close to 150, correct? Yeah. Our goal for that campus is to cap it at 200 students.
Okay, and how many teachers do we currently have?
We have, on the 8th grade side, which is the students that are retained 8th graders and go there, we have, is it 5 or 4, Dr. Garza? 5. And then on the other side, were the kids that deal with the non-traditional side of that campus. We also have, I think, 5, but we augment it with a lot of substitute teachers that provide assistance to the students. We are looking to add a couple more teachers this year because we will increase the enrollment.
Okay, and SGLC?
I don't know, SGLC is, I think, a total of 5 teachers as well, but,
They can have up to 30 students.
yeah, but
In the spring, it's more students in the fall.
Because we can look at stipends and make proposals for different stipends for different areas that are needed throughout the district, but then there's so many areas that we can always come up with and say, well, this is a hard-to-fill area as well. So I think that we have to look at the whole aspect of the district. And those 2 areas, yes, we're looking at the bilingual and we're looking at those students that are an alternative at the same time. But I know that there's other areas within the district that we can have pages and pages of stipends to say these are hard-to-fill areas. So,
We already have those. We're
yeah,
addressing
that's what I'm saying.
science and math, basically.
Mhm.
But that's something separate. Any other questions? And we'll go on to the regular budget workshop with stipends. Dr. Rios?
yeah, I just wanted to go through the responses. Mr. Smith asked for the comparison of the benefits paid from the districts in our group, and that's provided under R2. And these responses were provided via board updates as well. In R3 was an analysis of the increased cost of the district was to provide for increased substitute rates. That was discussed by the board at length, and we took the discussions that the board had using the TASB study that they gave us. So should the number of individuals that require substitutes remain constant for next year, we would increase from 1.346 million to 1.726 million given these new substitute rates. This, as I mentioned in the board update, this still leaves at one category to include. We have to go back and determine what the rate would be if you're subbing on a daily basis, but not long-term in an area that you're certified. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to come up, but we will definitely provide that for consideration. And then the fourth response was on the master's degrees and how many teachers that we have with master's degrees and how many of them are related to the subject that they're teaching. And the recommendation is going to be, if we flip to page 6, is that we set a stipend for master's degree in the content area that they're teaching. Currently, we only have 33 individuals who are teaching in an area where they have a master's, but we would grandfather those that have been receiving stipends for having masters that vary from anything outside of their teaching field. But we would no longer provide stipends for masters outside of the teaching field unless you're already earning it. And we provided the list there. Then question number 5 was the student-to-teacher ratios. And we provided that in a one sheet comparing the different districts. The bottom portion just compares our district year over year from 2011 to this coming school year, where we intend to have a student-to-teacher ratio of 16.4. The top portion gives you both student-to-teacher ratio as well as student-to-FTE ratio. FTE, just different employees, of course, takes into consideration all of our employees. We can see that in the teacher-to-student ratio, we're projected to be at 16.4, are at 16.4 this year. And we can see that the average is 15.6. So we can certainly make some improvement in that area. But we can also compare 16.4 to at least 2 other large districts that have a 17 to 1 and a 16.6 to 1 student ratio. And then the final one had to do with the scenarios for providing we provided the one for 1.8% general increase. Then we worked with Luz from TASB to provide a 2%, 2.2%, and 2.4% increase. And that shows how it would vary amongst groups and the total dollars cost. We will again present this through the rest of the workshop. Those were our responses. We're still needing to provide 2 more responses, and we're working on those. But I appreciate the work that staff did in getting all this information so quick. Unless there's questions, Mr. Mesa, we can move on.
Any questions from board members? Ms. Gonzalez? We'll move on.
And just to add, everybody has this chart that compares the different scenarios that TASB provided from the 1.8 to the 2.4.
Can I give one more scenario?
I'm so sorry?
Can I give one more scenario?
One more scenario?
Oh,
Contreras?
I saw where you stopped at 2.4. I know the teachers didn't receive anything last year.
Yes, it did, sir.
They did?
Yes.
About, was it a
1.8.
1.8, so they received 1.8. Okay. So 2.4, can we discuss this? So we're about 1,300 more or less. That's the 2.4. So if we would go to 2.8, looking at about $1,600, $1,700. Am I correct, more or less?
Are you talking about the starting pay? Or?
Yes, starting pay.
Oh, okay. I
All
don't
right.
know. I would have to ask Luz to put that together. But you're saying, how much more, sir? I'm sorry.
Well, you stopped at 2.8 for us to go to 2.8.
It generally goes up on the average about $110,000 per every 2 points. So to go from 2.4 to 2.8, you're talking about $225,000 more in addition to $316,000 that's already there. So you're talking about a little bit over $500,000 total, above what we're recommending.
Okay. Can you give us that scenario?
2.8?
Yes, Ms.
I just,
Amy?
can I have Dr. Rios explain the master's degree just one more time? I don't think I heard it right. The master's degree, if they're the content area, they have to,
Yes, ma'am. Currently,
yeah.
Currently, anyone with a master's degree receives a master's degree stipend.
Okay.
So you could have a second grade teacher who received a master's in counseling or a master's in administration.
Okay,
Okay, that's not in their content area,
right.
but they're still getting a stipend because they earned the master's. That's been in existence for 25 years at least.
Okay.
And then you have teachers who, for example, you might be a 4th grade teacher or an 8th grade teacher, and you have a master's in reading. That's definitely within your content area. Or you could be a 8th grade teacher teaching social studies, and you have a master's in history. That's in your content area.
Right.
Right now, we don't differentiate. Everybody gets a stipend.
Okay.
But research shows that the effect on learning has to do with people who have masters in their content area.
Okay.
So then what we would recommend is that anyone who's been receiving a stipend, keep their stipend, but any new master's degree individuals would only get a stipend if it's in your content area, and you only receive it as long as you're in that content area.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Rios. Any other questions from board
Just
members?
wanted to ask
Yeah,
about,
Ms. Webb.
no,
This is just a comment.
Ms. Gonzalez.
You made reference to counseling, people that had a master's in counseling and that were teaching 3rd grade or 4th grade. However, in lieu of those individuals that get a counselor's degree in as a master's, wouldn't it be beneficial for those counselors or those individuals to also keep a stipend, since they are now having the ability to work with the students that might have difficulty within their classrooms to help with other issues that might arise within the class?
Well, let me
That's just a,
just clarify something. The people that are earning those are grandfathered in. It's just for new people coming in.
no, I understand that.
Okay.
But since we were talking before, with the shootings and the safety and everything else that's going around, the country, when you look at the people getting certified in counseling, aren't those individuals more capable to help with students that might have some sort of a mental issue or something else within their classrooms? That's just a thought.
Dr. Reeves?
I think that they definitely would add some benefit. But what we're asking all teachers to do, at least this coming year, there's really no differentiation. And when we look at the budget, which will be the first slide after we go through all the introductions, I think that we're all going to quickly see that we have money as a district. I've always told people we're not a poor district, but we do have to have some type of fiscal responsibility, and there's choices to make. What we're trying to do is recommend a budget that emphasizes the priorities of the district, and so whenever something is suggested, whether it be by an employee, by an administrator, or even by the board, we have to ask ourselves, is that something that we want, or is that something that we need? And we can have that discussion, and then we'll act accordingly. I'm not the enemy of giving stipends. I just don't. I just know that we can't do everything, and I'd hate to differentiate between someone with a counseling stipend and someone with an administrative stipend, and it's a difficult situation. I would just rather say directly in the content area would be my recommendation, but that's my recommendation. The board can certainly decide.
And that's fine, sir. I was just making a suggestion with everything that has happened in the country and the way that we're looking for people that would work with mentally, I don't want to say mentally disturbed students,
Challenge.
but, you know.
Yes, Ms. Gonzalez.
Yeah. So when you trying to get teachers to come in here with a master's, like Eagle Pass and the other school districts, you want to get paid extra if you're in the content area, or do you know about that? Or is it just general master's degree that you get a stipend?
Right now, it's everybody, but going forward, our recommendation
No,
is.
but Eagle Pass and the other school districts.
Oh, well, you know, Luz mentioned that most districts are going to a content area stipend, but we can certainly go back and find out which of the districts in our comparison group.
Yeah, because that
have
helps,
already
the
moved in
extra
that direction.
$1,500. Like, for example, myself, I got a master's in secondary ed, but I wouldn't be qualified to get the thing if I taught elementary, which I did.
Correct.
Sad.
It's for new people.
But I'm saying, as a new person, as a
Yes.
regular person,
Yeah.
I wouldn't get it.
If we look, I'm sorry, Mr. Bessa, if we consider that tab that I shared with y'all on the stipends, and again, in this case, there would all be grandfathered in, but I'm sorry, that I was in the wrong tab. Let me get to the right tab. If we look at the list of stipends here in tab 4, we're talking about paying $156,000 of stipends to people outside their content area. Over the long haul, $156,000 is a whole lot of money. And that's why, as a board, you have to decide what's a need and what's a want. $156,000, when that materializes into savings, that's a whole lot of money. But again, we recommend one thing and the board decides.
Well, the only reason I'm saying is I know masters, I teach English, okay, in high school. I get my master's. I can't get an English, a degree, master's degree in call it English here because they don't offer it. So the incentive was to get your master's. Now it has to be in my content area. I don't know if there's going to be any incentive now. What
That's
for?
why we would grandfather the individuals that already have their masters.
Yeah. I don't have a master's, I'm teaching at the high school. I'm teaching at the high school. This is, and I'm working toward it. But not in English, because they don't offer it here.
They don't offer it at the,
So,
at Solras.
so I go.
I-
So
I-
teach math, to
Listen,
teach math.
I can recommend a really
Or
good online
science.
program.
So
Just giving you
we're gonna move on.
examples.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The budget workshop, we will review legal requirements. However, everyone does have a copy of the budgetary controls, and this provides you in detail the basis of accounting for funding in public education, the basic systems of the codes, how we use our functional codes and what they're for, the processes for adopting the budgets, and our budget calendar is included in there as well. I will briefly highlight on some of the legal requirements as we're going through the presentation. Of course, the legal requirements that are formulated are provided by the state, they're provided by TEA, and they're provided by our local board policy. So as I mentioned before, whenever there's an agenda item that refers to a board policy, we have that in there in the board policy included in the agenda item language, in the memo, but in here as well, as we're reviewing information that's required for the budget, we have what board policy it references. For the statement of Texas law, and this is in the Texas Education Code, one of the most important points here is that we must prepare the budget by August 20th. So our calendar, our budget calendar is formulated so that we are ready or are prepared with the budget by August 20th in order for it to be approved by August 31st, in order for us to be able to publicize a public meetings notice for 10 days. Our district goals, the one that guides us through the budget process, is to be good stewards of the community's resources and explore new opportunities for organizational efficiency and effectiveness. As we study the budget, our philosophy has been for the past couple of years to maintain financial stability in all programs and operations of the district. This means providing a balanced budget and ensuring that we have accurate enrollment projections and appropriate staffing to match that enrollment. But we do seek our parameters, we do seek to prioritize our budget to ensure that students perform at or above grade level, achievement gaps are eliminated, all students will graduate ready for college, career, and life in a globally competitive economy. All schools meet or exceed the state accountability. And another budget parameter that, again, we have maintained the past couple of years is that the district seeks to maintain competitive compensation levels for all classes of employees and consider such recommendations as long as they're sustainable. On our budget projections, this is the very first slide that Dr. Rios was referring to. This summarizes the different areas that we will be reviewing today. The general fund is the main operating fund, and the general fund is one of the executive budgets that must be approved by the board. But the general fund, as I mentioned, is the main operating fund. So we are going to review the revenues, the projected changes in revenues, and the projected and discuss the different expenditures that have come up through the conversations in order to understand what our revenue projection is going to be versus the budgeted expenditure request that we have either researched or received or may encounter. And another area that I really, really want to make sure that we keep in mind is, even though we're reviewing the budget for 2018-19, as I review the slides for property tax, I'll discuss what will happen in 1920 to our revenue as well. So it's really important to keep in mind because, again, we have to ensure that we can sustain the budget that we approve. Dr. Rios, did you want to add anything here?
Yes, it's just important to note, at the very top, the green line,
Oh, yes.
the first column is with our current tax rate at $1.04. The second column, the column to the right, is should the board decide to have a tax ratification election, that would be the difference in numbers. Yanakani is going to take us in detail through every piece, but the parts I want to highlight before she goes on is, as we look at the projected revenue and the projected expenses, very important to note that we're making this recommendation with a 1.8 general increase. That's not to say that's what it's going to be. It's just how we worked on it. We also talked about stipends. Benefits are just going to be a reflection of our salary. As salaries goes up, benefits goes up. We do have a pack of mandates. We do give ourselves a little bit of credit because we know that we'll have vacancies and we won't fill those. This is the substitute increase that we shared in our response. For the first year, we have to provide the ESCO funding because the savings won't materialize until the project's complete. And the non-salary allocations of 803, those are just increases for certain departments. The sustainability plan, we removed 720,000 because we haven't had the operations workshop. If you notice, we have a total change in expenditures, which is an increase of 3.3 million, but we haven't decided how much new positions, if any, are they going to cost, how much removing the salary cap is going to cost, and then obviously when we have our operations and technology, how much money does the board want to allocate for the maintenance? We'll certainly have our recommendations, but we'll have to decide. And again, that's the difference. Right now, without filling in the blanks on any area where we have a question mark, we would have a 278,000 money left over. Should we have the TRE, then we would have $3.4 million left over that then we can allocate to different areas. This is just a big summary so that as Yanakani takes us through the budget, the rest of the budget workshop, we can see how much money we don't have and how much money we may have and frame our questions accordingly. Is there any questions on this worksheet for Yanakani?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
Remind me again what ESCO is.
It's the energy efficiency project, the loan, and I'll elaborate on that.
Okay. Any other questions? No.
Okay, thank you. One of the most important components for every school district in the state of Texas is calculating their revenue for their general fund and their debt service from their property values. So again, property tax is part of our board policy. It is a legal policy. It is a local policy. But by August 1st, we should receive our final property tax values. Right now, we're working off of preliminary numbers, but we should receive our certified values by August 1st. It's really important to understand the history of our property appraised values and our taxable values. So we have here over the last 5 years, and you can see where our appraisal values, I don't know if you can see the mouse. Yes, you can. Okay, the appraisal values, the change in taxable value year over year. So we have historically seen a positive change, whether it be 0.59% in 2017, 7.9% in 2016, 1.59 in 2015, or 2.83. And if we look at prior years, we've always seen a positive. We have not experienced a negative adjustable taxable value. But you can see where in 2016, if we had more history, you could see where every 3 to 4 years, we have reappraisals, and you can see the jump in those years. That's important to know because that's how the data we also use to forecast. Now in 2018, 2019, again, these are preliminary values that we received, and certified values will be received by August 1st. We have a preliminary taxable value of $1,828,805,087. That is an increase of $223 million, or 13.8%, but that includes $200 million value from the wind farm. Now, the wind farm does not have any tax, Chapter, I think, 313 tax exemptions, so their property is fully taxable. However, they are allowed to depreciate at an accelerated level or value, and we're estimating that their depreciation would be at $20 million per year. So in the 2019-20 forecast 2019-20 column, I did forecast where the freeze adjustable tax value would reduce by $20 million, but would also, if our property value appraisals maintain that average 2% change, then in combination with the average 2% change in appraisal values and the reduction for the depreciation, we would still see a slight increase in our taxable values for 1920. So what that means is our taxable values, our local tax collections would be maintained. So when you're looking at our local tax collections, you wouldn't see a drop in that. But one thing to also consider is anytime there is an increase in your property values, you will see the state offset you in the following year. So again, we will be discussing that, but I want you to see our history, what we're using as our forecast. Again, it is preliminary data. It doesn't change. It hasn't changed much in the past between preliminary and certified, but there could still be some change when we receive the certified values. But again, our property tax value is one of our biggest components of our funding in local taxes and how the state funds our district. Any questions here? Okay. And just to add, the freeze adjusted taxable value, that is after everybody receives their state mandated homestead exemption, any other exemptions, any property exemptions. So this is what's taxable. Another very important component, so again, the two most important components are your property tax and your average daily attendance. Again, average daily attendance is a component of calculating the foundation school program, and it is the responsibility of the superintendent, the principals, and the teachers. They are responsible to the board and to the state to maintain accurate current attendance records. So we have an assessment and accountability department that does regular audits at campuses to ensure the accuracy of our attendance data. For enrollment, what we use, or what I have used, is a progression rate. I first start by looking at the ratio that is set, or our average ratio that is set between the live birth data that's provided by the Texas Department of State Health Services and the number of students that enrolled. So again, we have a ratio that shows us for the students that would have entered kindergarten in 2018, we had 652 that enrolled. So that ratio is 0.76. So we use the average of these last 2 years' ratios to forecast the number of students that will enroll in our district in kindergarten for 2019 and for 2020. So again, this is what we use for kindergarten. And then for first grade through 12th grade, we use the grade progression rate, where your students are progressing, or the number of students are progressing from one grade to the next grade in the next year. But there's also transitions that affect enrollment. That could be anything from students moving, new students coming in, students unfortunately dropping out of our district. So all of those changes are included in that progression rate, so that we can forecast our future rates. And as a district, we have historically had a stable enrollment. And again, that's where we provide this data, because once we forecast our enrollment data, we then can forecast our average daily attendance. Our enrollment data is very important for staffing, But our average daily attendance forecast is very important because that's what the state uses for funding. So again, we have enrollment for staffing, but average daily attendance is what the state uses for funding. And just to remind everybody, for average daily attendance, our pre-K students only count as half a student. So for state funding, our pre-K students only count as a half a day student. So even though we have 498 pre-K students that could have come to school all year, we only get credit on average daily attendance funding for half of that, okay? And again, this number is really important for us to forecast, for us to use in forecasting our state funding. Are there any questions?
Just a statement here for board members. This is why it's so critical at every campus that we at least maintain, but improve attendance when it goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been kind of preaching, committees, attendance committees, and anything that we can do, because we can identify those students that already are consistently absent through the grades. You can follow those students from one grade level to another. And so anything that can be done, because I still see that the percentage is going down, especially in the bigger campuses, like high school and freshmen. But it's been, we get the attendance report, and you can notice, like, sometimes 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, those are critical areas that committees are needed to formulate a plan of action early in the year instead of just watching it drop from the beginning of the year to the end of the school year. But that's one sure way of generating additional funds for the district. Sorry.
Thank you. On the executive budget, this is a snapshot of all of the budgets that the district has. And within all of these budgets, the executive budgets that are required for the board to approve include the general fund, which we're reviewing today. We're also going to review the debt service fund, which is the interest in sinking, and we've been talking about the tax ratification election. And back in April, through the SFE, our food service management company, we did already work on the food service budget. However, in the August meeting, all of the 3 budgets will be placed together and classified as the executive budget for the board to approve. Those would be the 3 that the board approved. Now again, general fund, I will repeatedly say this is our main operating fund. So when we talk about any types of transactions or changes or recommendations, it's mainly a general fund classified item. This is our main operating fund. This fund does calculate its local tax collections and our state funding off of the $4 that we currently have allocated. On general fund revenue, I want to give you a recap of our prior years. So our general fund revenue in 15-16, this includes local tax collection, state funding, and any federal allocations that are received to the general fund, was at $82,185,000. Very slight increase for 16-17, but in 17-18, we went up to $84,348,000. Now, our local tax collection does account for almost 20% of that at $1.04. Now the state funding accounts for the other 70%, and this is and since 15-16 through 2018-19, as of the state funding, our basic allotment, which is the primary tool that the state uses to fund all the districts equally, has been and is, as of the latest information, is expected to stay at 5,140. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mesa, I think it's important that we highlight the comparison between 15-16 and 16-17. If we notice, in that year, the local tax collections went up by almost $1 million. but then we see how the state funding decreased. That's because once the taxes hit the tax rolls and the state sees it, they do what they call equalized funding. So the gain between 15-16 and 16-17 was minimal. The reason it's important to note that is because next year, we're gonna see an increase because of the windmills. But we have to anticipate that the following year, that's gonna drop. So we'll see a much smaller amount of money from the state, and it won't be much different than what it'll be next year. So we can expect that the funding in 1920, our general operating budget in 1920 is going to be very similar to 18-19. So
To
what we
17-18.
commit, I'm
It will
sorry.
be similar to 17, 18,
Yeah.
sorry.
So what we commit to for next year, we have to know that we're committing to that for the following year with no additional funding.
And one thing that I also want to add is the legislative session starts in January. That legislative session usually ends in June. And if there are any changes, and as I mentioned, there hasn't been any changes that are currently being discussed. If there's any changes, we'll see that in the 2019-2020 revenue. But as of what we're presenting today, it's all the information that we currently have.
One question.
Yes, sir.
Kanakami. We're not seeing any, the pipeline that's going in, it's not going to affect us at all?
The pipeline, I can ask for more information. It is currently in our rolls, I believe at, I want to say 30 million, but I haven't seen a change in value in the last couple of years. I think about 2 years, it's maintained the same value. And when Ms. Sheedy and I last spoke, there wasn't any anticipated change in that value. But I can get more information on the pipeline. They do have a external appraisal company that provides them additional data on the pipeline and on the windmills and provides them with guidance.
I think my question has to do with the new pipeline going in between Del Rio and Brackettville. And I'm not talking about the previous one. A couple of years back, there was one that was placed in, and I know we got some revenue, but
Okay.
is there a new development going on? Do board members know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that one that they laid in and now they're laying another one.
Yes.
This is the second one.
Yes.
I will follow up with Ms. Sheedy on the preliminary values. There wasn't a change in the pipeline values.
Okay, but you find out.
But I
about
will,
that.
I will definitely, sir.
Mrs. Valdez, by any chance, do you have any projections for the 2018, 2019? Because on the middle column, you basically, well,
Yeah, we have
for
them
the
on the
1
following
point,
slides.
oh, it's the next, okay.
I wanted to show y'all the history because, again, the state funding is something that we really are going to, it's not that we're going to focus, but we need to make sure that we are taking into consideration when we're making decisions for 18-19. But this was our history, and I really wanted to point out that the basic allotment has not changed. We do have a legislative session coming up, and I reviewed some of the highlights from Moat Casey on what's being discussed, and the basic allotment is not being discussed. And so what that means is they're not discussing any major changes to fund school districts. Now, when we look at our general fund revenue, we break it up into 3 categories, which is local, state, and federal. And then on the slide that follows after federal, we'll see the whole, all of our general fund revenue, and we'll see for the 18-19 and 19-20 year, and look at it if we were to remain at the $4 tax rate and at the $15.98 if we were to do the tax ratification election. But in the local funding part of our general fund includes our tax collections. So as you can see, for fiscal year 2019, with the increase of over $228 million in taxable values, we see almost a $2.5 million increase in local tax collections. I've then projected that we would only see like about an 8.84% increase the following year because we'd have an accelerated depreciation for the windmills. However, we'd still expect to experience increase in appraisal values. So for the following year, you would only see a slight change of $294,000 in local tax collections. Our penalties and interest have remained consistent but we've consistently maintained about a $3 million outstanding tax collection, and that's where we hire, or we have contracted through an interlocal agreement with the county. We have Linebarger, Gogan, Blair, and Sampson that help us maintain our tax rate and our collections rates. On tuition and fees, we're not forecasting a change. That's where we have our summer school, or our secondary summer school has tuition, and our driver's ed program. On other local revenues, we have included in there any rentals of our facilities, but also any rebates that we receive from our interlocal agreements. For example, through Staples, we'll receive reimbursements on an annual basis based on the usage of these interlocals. On the interest earnings, we have, since this past year, we did change our depository bank, which was an increase in our interest rate. We have explored different investing opportunities that are in compliance with the Public Funds Investment Act, and we did hire, or we are working with Patterson and Associates to continue to identify opportunities. But as of the last update on the Public Funds Investment Act conference, they do anticipate that we'll see increases, about 2 more increases in the upcoming year. So I do have an increase there in interest earnings. But if we were to have higher local tax collections, I do have an increase showing if we were to do another increase if we were to do a tax ratification election. Again, this would be our interest earned in our banks. And we provide the investment reports on a quarterly basis, and they're also available on our website, on our transparency website. But this is something that has, this year, has really benefited us from the opportunities that we have taken. Because in the past, we were not hardly earning anything in interest. But as interest rates had started to increase, we really started looking at opportunities. Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Mesa, and I apologize, Ms. Valdez, earlier we did not discuss the interest that would be earned from the $18 million. Has that been included in this projection?
The $18 million is a loan which, the $18 million that comes in is considered a construction loan. That $18 million cannot be classified under general fund. So it has its own funding source, which would be, I think, 619 is what we're going to use. And that's kind of like bond proceeds. When we receive them, we put them in the different 600 funds for constructions. So that's in a separate funding source, but any interest that we receive from there we will use to pay any of the debt. We can use to pay debt, but we cannot record that interest in general fund because it is considered a construction project. And yes, sir.
So we can use to pay off part of that $18 million debt, or
yes.
we can use for additional construction projects that the board may identify?
I'd have to find out on the additional because the Series 2018 note, it was generally stated as renovation projects. So depending on that language, yes, we can explore that. But I'd have to look into the exact language that we approved.
Thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Rios. But I think Mr. Contreras has a question.
Well, it's basically on that too, and I don't know if we have a $1 million guaranteed savings from that project, if I'm not mistaken. Can that be factored in as a plus? I mean, you're going to save it.
Yes, we can, sir, but that's for the following year because the savings won't materialize until the project's complete.
Okay.
Okay. I wrote down that question. On our co-curricular activities, these are our gate fees that we charge for our different sports, so our athletic events. So this helps offset the cost of our athletics program. And then on our intermediate sources, We have included in here the reimbursement that we received from Angelo State University for the stipends that are paid to teachers through that program. And then we also have included in here any surplus sales that the county has for property that is then distributed out to the different taxing entities. And again, we're not forecasting that to change. I believe a couple months ago we brought the Angelo State MOU, and there was no change in the funding that we were going to receive from Angelo State for those stipends. Question?
I had a question for Dr. Rios.
Uh-huh.
Whenever we do have money back from the appraisal district, where does it go?
The money, that money should go into the general fund.
Yes, sir. It is recorded under general fund. It is not recorded as a budget item because we cannot plan for the appraisal district to have a refund.
Right.
But those monies that come in from your revenues and whatever expenditures we don't have, any favorability that we have into the year goes into fund balance.
Right. Yeah, they're not constant. It could be 1 year yes and next year nothing.
Correct.
But it is reflected though?
It would be reflected in our actuals or in our audit, but not in the budget.
Not here.
Because we can't plan for that reimbursement.
Okay.
Okay. For our state funding, again, the legislative session is coming up, but as of the 2018-19 school year, we have the basis for how they're going to fund districts. And for 1920, we're not anticipating any changes on how they fund districts, but you can see here where we do anticipate, obviously, to be at 65 million between state funding and our TRS on behalf. But in the following year, as I mentioned, once the increased property values reach the state's appraisal rolls, we'll see the decrease from the state funding. So you can see here where, again, we have an increase in local tax collections in fiscal year 2019, but in 2020 is where we see a decrease. But at the end, we'll see a summary of this. And on our federal revenues that are allocated to our general fund, those include indirect cost reimbursements. Those include our SHARS program, impact aid, and any E-rate reimbursement. So those are federal dollars that are allowed to be recorded under general fund. We do not anticipate any changes in that area, and I just noticed that the note wasn't changed. But this is federal funds, and we don't anticipate any changes. But when we look at our funding, our total funding, you could see our 2018 original revenue was approved at $84 million. If we maintain our tax rate of $1.04 in 2019, we'll see $87 million. But then in 2020, we would go back to our $84 million. And of course, you can see the changes between local and state. If we were to do a tax ratification election, which is not an increase to our tax rate, just simply swapping our pennies, our district would then see $93 million in revenue. But if we did the tax ratification election, we would then have to pay for the debt from general fund. So we'll see that in a later slide. So in 2019, we'd be projected at $93 million, and at 2020, we'd be projected at $89 million. But there is a net effect to that change after we pay our debt. So if you're looking at these numbers right here, our debt is about $4 million. So if you took the $9 million minus the 4, we're going to net a $5 million increase in 2019, and in 2020, it's close to a $1 million increase. Any questions? Okay. For our general fund expenditures, again, we have board policy that guides the compensation and benefits, where we shall recommend to the board for approval any compensation plans that are part of our wages, salary structure, stipends, benefits, and incentives, and any of our substitute extra duty rates. Now, at the last workshop, Luz from TASB presented a 1.8 general pay increase, and at that workshop, we were asked for a 2%, a 2.2%, and a 2.4% model. So everybody should have a copy of the comparisons that we have here. And this, if you look at the TASB salary study, it includes the stipends as well. This is just the general pay increase. So on here, a general pay increase for 1.8% is almost 5 million, and then for 2% is 1.6, almost 1.6 million. 2.2 is 1.7, and 2.4 is 1.8. And at the very bottom, I have it how each model compares to the 1.8. And under the teachers section, we also have what TASB would recommend if there is a change in the teacher starting pay. But everybody does have those copies. Mm-hmm.
I think we all have our copies.
Okay. Any questions on the? And again, these are the different models, so that you could see the different, so that you can compare the models side by side. Okay. Now, in new positions, again, these are positions that are being requested, and this is part of the budget process where positions are requested. We have positions being requested at the secondary level, which mainly include our special ed co-teach program, and at San Felipe Memorial Middle School as well. And we have the positions for Laughlin, and even though we will have 8 elementary teachers, again, through the transition of students going from Ruben Chavita and from other campuses, we estimate that it will only be a change of 4 teachers, as in an increase of 4 teachers, because every year when we start our summer, we do forecast our enrollment, we do forecast our staffing, and we do look constantly on a weekly basis, look at our enrollment patterns. We also have a request for the communications department to add a technician, and then for 8 peace officers. These positions, based on using a median level of experience between 5 to 10 years, would cost about 1.5 million. This does not include benefits. Okay. On the next slide, Dr. Rose will discuss the strategies on certain positions.
I was discussing with the cabinet about the additional positions that are requested, particularly the 11 special education teachers, and then at least 2 additional secondary teachers. Given the current number of vacancies that we have, which is not very different than the past year, it would be disingenuous of us to believe that we could fill all these vacancies and then an additional 20 vacancies. It's also difficult to add positions because when we started this presentation, we showed how little money was left in variance and still not adding a plan for operations, a plan for increased salaries, a plan for removing the cap. Dollar-wise, it wouldn't work out. However, there are some strategies that we could consider to fill some of the current vacancies. We've listed under their positions that our district has, and not all districts have all of these positions. I would take a stand and say that our district currently has big needs in special education and bilingual. We have made an effort over the last 2 years to train enough teachers in GT certification so that we could mirror practices of other districts and have GT classrooms at every grade level and not have standalone GT teachers. We also have master reading teachers if we needed to reallocate them. And I'm not saying we're recommending any of these immediately, but as we look at the budget and find the need to cut or transition costs from one bucket to the other, these are just some options that we could consider. Again, we don't have to make any of these decisions until we decide what expenses we want to take on for next year and the year after that. But these are just some ideas. Any questions?
Questions?
Well, I think it's a number error, I'm not sure, unless I'm not, if you look at Laughlin where it says 10,
Oh, hold on, let me see.
and you look at the people you have on there, I only count 9. So are we missing somebody?
No, I removed somebody, but the formula must have not updated on that number.
Okay.
I removed a position that we were discussing that was not going to be part of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ana Connie, that is the Laughlin special education
Right.
teacher that we don't have students enrolled yet.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll make that correction. Thank you.
Just a brief comment on, it's very difficult when we look at that list. We've had, for example, dyslexia teachers that do a whole lot. Again, I mentioned in the past testing for dysgraphia, tutoring slow readers and tier 3 readers, besides the dyslexia responsibilities. And so you look at the list, and it's difficult to just pinpoint and say we've got extra personnel. It's very hard to make that decision. And I know when we do make a decision, it's going to be one that affects personnel that we currently have. And so it's real tough to make those decisions. But as we go through the budget, we're going to, again, scrutinize where we need to, and then find the money available to be able to make these changes.
Okay. On our health insurance fund, we have been monitoring the fund as using a 12-month rolling 12 rolling months estimates. We've been reviewing it with our current or our new advisors, and at this time, based on that, the fund itself is not experiencing the increase that had been projected by the prior consultants, which was Gallagher. We have looked into what the increases in the past were from, and how those numbers, had they been looked at correctly, would have eliminated such a large forecast or such a large scare that our fund was going to change by so much. But when Gallagher Group provided us their forecast, it included, as we've been looking in the details, there was some catch-up that was done from one of the local providers, and I think it's about 1.4 million, where they were catching up in 2 months with their invoices that only had so much time to be processed, and they were catching up with those. And at that time, when Gallagher looked at it, they looked at it as increased costs. They used it as part of our forecast, but as we've been looking at the details more and more, that was just I don't want to say one time, but that those expenses as catch-up should not have been used in our forecast as a forecast for what it would increase. So as of right now, the annual contribution without the committed funds is $5,279.40 per employee. With that commitment, if it continues and the fund continues at this rate, we would be able to sustain the fund. Now, on July 16th, we will have a board workshop where Brown & Brown will show us or will present to us their recommendations as a recommended range of sustaining the fund or building a fund balance in the fund. So that information will be provided on the 16th.
I have a question on that.
Yes, sir.
I know that in the past, we were looking at numbers and like expenses that were paid throughout the year, and I know that Dr. Rios, we kind of zoned in on some of the areas that we looked from prior years and then see the increase from last year to this year, there was one that was like 3 times as much, and it had to do with our local hospital here. Was that ever looked into and determined why so much of an increase?
Yes, sir. We met, two things. We met with the hospital CO, Sachi Hurtado, and a couple members of their board last week. And we also visited with Brown Brown. Brown has identified 1 month in particular where the increases were abnormal to previous years. We explained to the hospital that the billing year, they did indicate that they were behind a few months, so that is probably the month that got tagged on to the following year. We're going to go back to the hospital, identify the particular month based on the information that Brown gave us through their study of the reports, and they're going to see what they can do to give us actual costs so we can pinpoint what services were provided to detail the increases. But I think that at this point we have enough information to know that the hospital is catching up on some billing, and that's why it carried over to the next plan year for us. It didn't carry over for their fiscal year, but it carried over for our plan year, and that made a huge difference. We appreciate Brown's diligence because they really pointed it out before the hospital was ever pointed out, and certainly the other, the previous consultant was never able to do it. So we think that we've identified it. We just want to be able to pinpoint it, and I think working with Brown and the hospital, we'll be able to come up with that figure. Also, we'll take this time to report that the hospital is willing to work with the district to come up with a plan. They understand that they have to stay afloat, and they also understand that our fund has to stay solvent. So we look to have a much better plan year.
I'm glad that, Dr. Rios and staff is looking into it because, as you mentioned, they're behind in their billing, but it affects us tremendously from, when you compare it from previous expense, from last year to this year, which was 3 times as much. And so something has to be done in clarifying those things and making sure that if they are behind, then something needs to happen to correct that. But it does affect us when you look at previous year expense and to current year. And so I'm glad that you're looking into it, but there's got to be something there to pinpoint.
What we shared with the hospital is that we understand that they have a time frame to bill. And we don't doubt that they're entitled to that money. But we shared that it has a direct effect on us, and us being their biggest customer, when you do come across something like that, just share it with us so that we know to expect it, and we don't panic, thinking that that's just normal increases, as was previously communicated to us.
So I'm glad you're looking into it. Hopefully you'll find the exact costs.
And Brown & Brown also has reports that they will be providing us on a quarterly basis, and we are meeting this week with over the phone, but with Brown & Brown and TML and the claims auditor, the CTI company, so that they could guide us on having a monthly dashboard in order to avoid having these types of issues. But there are reports that are readily available. We just don't know how to read them. So that way we can make sure that we know exactly what reports to ask for.
Good. Thank you for doing it.
On the substitutes, again, as we discussed earlier, it's about a $400,000 change for substitutes. What we have listed here is, as a district, we discussed that 80% of our budget is on salaries and benefits. But as a district, we also have what we call a substitute budget and extra duty budget. So we have, and I have it sorted in descending order, but we have a additional salary budget of $3.2 million, which includes the majority of it being our day-to-day subs, and it also transitions to the other programs. For instance, special ed has what they call day-to-day individuals that come and shadow with the students. So that's how those individuals are paid through the substitute budget. The transportation department, when the employees exceed their hours worked per week on our CTE, this is how they classify the budget for paying their stipends. So again, we have different budgets within, we have additional salary budgets associated with any stipends or extra duty or overtime pay if we're required to pay overtime pay. We also have student workers that work at different parts of the district throughout the year. So again, there's different budgets here. I'm sorry, there's also an additional budget that when we talk about, for instance, substitutes, last year or this fiscal year is trending at 1.3 million, and if we apply the Region 15 recommended changes, then we're looking at an additional almost 400,000. So again, this is so that you can see the non-scenario, I'm going to call it non-TASB salary budget as well. Are there any questions?
What is that retiree, 100,000?
I'm so sorry? Oh, retiree? Board policy, DEC, we have at the very last page where an employee can be paid up to 45 days at half day their daily rate for any sick leave days that they have available. So we do budget for that.
And that's how it's identified by retiree?
That's what I call it, yes, sir.
Any
This is-
questions?
yeah.
Ms. Gonzalez?
The thing is with the substitutes, the non-degreed, is that still 0 to 60 hours? So that a high school graduate would get paid as much as a college freshman or sophomore?
As long as they have less than 60 hours.
Are they going to get paid $75? Or someone that's got 60 hours?
That's what we're proposing, the 75, if they have less than 60.
But they don't have, when they have zero.
Zero.
Because I've seen other school districts where they ask for 12 hours at least, up to 30 hours. They have a certain rate. And then from 30 up to 60, they got another rate. And somebody could have gone to school for 120 hours and never got the degree. They're still going to get paid the same. And we need to talk about that, I think, but I don't think that's quite fair for high school, for 0 hours up to, because before it was 60 hours. Is there a reason why it was changed?
We expanded it from 0 to all the way down to 0 hours to be able to get enough substitutes, and because they are required to go through a training. So you either have your 60 college hours or you go through this online course.
Just for the benefit of the new board members, this is the actual amount that we pay for substitutes, 1.346,
Correct.
which is a whole lot.
Ms. Valdez, and I hate to, please excuse me, I'm still trying to grasp everything. Going back to this retirees, can you explain it again? That's what you pay the daily rate for someone who's retiring,
They have
Half their daily.
leftover days,
half their daily rate,
Half the daily rate.
up to 45 days.
up to
That's
45 days.
Because they
DEC
still,
local.
explain why, they still get money, don't they?
And they do have to qualify
get
for
money.
retiring. It's not somebody
Yeah, I
who's
don't
just
think
leaving the
understands.
district. They have to qualify through the TRS program as a retiree.
As a retiree.
So if somebody leaves the district, it doesn't count. It's only for qualified retirees.
So they have to be retired or at retiring age?
I'll give you an example, sir.
Yes, please.
Right now, I just got to my retirement possibility. If I have personal days on the books, let's say I have 60 days on the books. So those days are going to just be left alone. If I was to retire this year, because I'm officially retiring under TRS, and only if I'm retiring from the school district, of those 60 days, I can sell 45 of those days back to the school district, but they wouldn't pay me my daily rate. They would only pay me half my daily rate. And we have every retiree that takes advantage of that every year.
So let's say, so I guess it's a direct correlation to our attendance. So can we identify those teachers that are within gap or that
That qualify?
that qualify, that are just taking those days because they don't want to give them up and they have over the 45 and 60 days, and maybe increase more than the half the rated rate so they don't use them and they can walk away with them instead of using them as they're getting ready to retire?
Let me tell you, historically, I was the one that actually I brought this up, DEC. Being a former principal, that's what they would do. People that were up to retirement were getting $25 a day, and they would much rather come and work Mondays and be out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And so we had a lot of key positions, whether it's counselors, whether it's an assistant principal that you really didn't have. And so we increased that amount so that they would at least come to work, and then when they retire, get a check for the amount of days that they had accumulated. But in the past, it was only $25. And so that was the idea, to keep the employees from not taking 200 days or whatever they might have, which is possible to have 200 days.
I mean, would it be possible to, like you said, revisit that and maybe look at it again? So keep them? I mean, how many employees do we have within that group
I
there?
don't know.
Do you know?
We do maintain a list for audit purposes of all of the employees that qualify. On that list, we do not have listed who's taking their days or who isn't, but we currently have a file as of August 2017, how many days were available, and if they all were to retire that day, how much it would cost our district. So for audit purposes, we maintain that chart. We'd be updating it this August, but we can provide you the one from the prior August, but it would not include what their attendance rate is.
We can, we'll look at it, and we can look at, I would recommend to the board, not that we increase the half-daily rate, rather than increase the number of days we can look at scenario from 45 days to 50 days to 55 days. But before we make that recommendation to the board, we'll go back and look of the people that retired this year, how many days that they have above the 45 days that they took. So we'll look specifically at that number of people that retired and see how many days they took that they may have otherwise sold back. That way we can make an informed recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, go on.
Okay. Now, we will start on the non-salary expenditures, and these are part of the either campus or department budgets. All budgets are required to be presented at a functional level, at minimum. However, if you have a recommendation on seeing this at the object code level, we can also put that together. But for approval purposes and at minimum, we do have to present at the functional level. I tried to group the budgets together so that because most of their expenses would be similar. For instance, the CNI department provides the staff development and some resources for the campuses. And this year, with the increase in the number of staff development days, we see a correlation with the increase in their budget. So the department's budget has an increase, a proposed increase of $100,000. At the elementary and secondary level, again, we also base that the campuses put together their budget request based on their forecasted enrollment. And we, as I mentioned before, our enrollment trends are steady, but at the secondary level, they are including in there some textbooks that they'd like to purchase. But again, I have this categorized just in areas to where they experience similar expenses. We can change it to the wishes of the board, but it does have to, at a minimum, be at the functional level. But if there's another way that you'd like to see it, please let me know. For this presentation, just as a high level, we categorize them by category. But we also provided you with the financial section, where it includes several, at least a paragraph of what that department entails. Was there a question? No? Yes, ma'am.
Would it be possible for you, where you have the function levels, to indicate what those function numbers are for those people that are not familiar with function 11, function
Yes, ma'am.
21, et cetera?
We also have it included in detail at the budget, in the budgetary controls, but I will add it to this, to the charts that we put together in the future meetings.
Where is it, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
Where is it?
You have included in this workshops tab, you have budgetary controls, and you have a financial section, and the PowerPoint. So again, this is more information that's provided with information that relates to the budget presentation.
And I know that in the past, because I did my own, I have my own. I have my own. In the past, you have also provided, like at the end of August 31st, 2017, and then the proposed budget for 2018, you had a total monetary for function 11. So would that be like a summary at the end where you could have all the function 11 totals together so we could know
yes.
exactly what is being spent on that particular function?
Yes, ma'am. We do. We will include that. I want to say I included it, but let me see. Let me just
I
check
didn't
really
see it,
quick.
so I was just doing, like I said, I was doing my own Excel sheet.
Yes.
So
Let me see. Oh, it didn't, so I'm sorry, it did not include it correctly. I will send it to you. We do have a summary at the functional level. But all of our presentations would include that, and we also do a crosswalk where we show at the functional level how much it is by object code as well. And
Correct.
what you'll traditionally see is that function 11 is 60% of our district's budget. And that's what we have averaged. And of course, you'll also see where salaries is around 80%.
thank you.
Mhm. We also have additional campus support allocations from our state-funded programs, which fall within general fund. We have the CTE program. And for these state programs, we are required to ensure that we provide a certain percentage, that we are required to provide a certain dollar amount of a budget. So when state departments ask for increases, it is based on making sure we're in compliance with what's required by the state for us to maintain. And for CTE, there is a request to add some software for their auto mechanic program and welding programs. Those items are expensive, but again, this is within the allowed amount that the state recommends for our CTE program for us to be in compliance. The bilingual program, again, and this is non-salary. So again, these are just either resources or consultant services or travel-related expenses that are part of our non-salary for these programs. So again, the CTE program receives state funding, our bilingual program. Our college readiness program, there are an increased number of students that are participating in the classes that are for college readiness, which means it's an increase in the tuition that we pay. So again, we're budgeting for that as well. Compensatory education, that fund provides resources to the campuses that in order to close the achievement gap. On the GT budget, at this point, they're not requesting a change. And again, this is, for the GT budget, they have the trip that they make, and they'd have different awards, not award ceremonies. They have different GT fairs. So again, that budget is mainly for the campuses to host their GT events. And of course, the special ed budget is mainly for staffing and for the substitutes or extra duty, but they also have resources that they code to general fund, but they also have federal funding as well. On the student programs for athletics, as you can see, the majority of athletics is at function 36, which is extracurricular activity. And for athletics, our major expense for athletics is travel related. And with the purchase of the 3 activity buses, the 18-19 budget for athletics has a reduction in their charter bus expenses. The CEP program, this is part of our community eligibility program where we provide free breakfast and free lunch to our students in pre-K through 8th grade. In the 17-18 school year, we had budgeted for $71,000. When we presented the 18-19 budget for food service, since it was showing a surplus, we were not required to budget for an allocation to maintain the CEP program. So that is actually a benefit for the district where we will not have to allocate $71,800 of budget to maintain that program. Participation has increased, so that really helped the program as well. On the fine arts area, their increase is mainly related to travel. They do have a lot of students participating. On the playoffs budget, this budget is set up for the different, I won't call them sports, but the different student organizations or activities that do make it to playoffs. We have FBLA or FCCLA. We have robotics included in here. We have band. We have a lot of athletics programs, but we're also including now cheerleading and bells. And then for student insurance, this is an insurance that the district purchases. We did approve this at the last meeting, and this is insurance for students that participate in UIL activities. And UIL itself is, again, related to all the campuses and all the grade levels that participate in UIL related programs, and this is mainly for travel. But for student programs, you can see with the removal of CEP and the reduction for charter buses in athletics, it's a decrease of $93,000. Under departments, again, I grouped the departments. There's not a magic way or a certain way that you have to have them grouped. I just thought I would group them by areas that the board is more familiar with. So for instance, the superintendent and board budget mainly includes legal expenses. I believe we have about $200,000 in legal expenses. And in human resources, they're requesting an increase, and this is for certifications. The Human Resource Department has certifications trainings that are provided to staff in order to increase the number of certifications of our staff in our district. Again, our EEIP fund is ending, and we want to continue that. Under the air evac, that is, bless you, that is an interlocal agreement that the district has with the county, the hospital, and I believe the city. This is our portion of maintaining that interlocal agreement, and maintaining the TASB salary study is also included here as well. We did not include the air evac or the TASB salary study in the original budget that we approved last year, so we're showing these as new line items. For finance, or for the remaining departments, on the finance department, I did break it up into different categories. The finance department does operate the Skyward system for the financial side, and on assessment and accountability, they oversee the student side of Skyward. So under the finance side, we have Skyward, we have our annual audit. This dollar amount is set on a 3-year contract. We also have insurances, and as about 3 weeks ago when I spoke with TASB, they did mention that there may be a rate increase of about $100,000. I do have that estimated in here. However, in July, I will find out, or I will receive the proposals, and we will update that in July to the proposals that we receive. And this is for our property, auto, and I'm trying to remember. It's property, auto, and workers' comp. So we have different insurances with TASB. And again, they were mentioning that they're projecting to be an increase.
It's also legal.
We do have legal, that's right, yes. Thank you, sir. We have our investment advisor and we, again, want to keep the investment advisor because we have benefited from our interest opportunities, and then we have the warehouse department. The major change that you'll see in finance is mainly related to the insurance, but again, once we receive the proposals, we will update that number, that information, and of course, we would present that to the board as well.
Who's our investment advisor? Estrada Hinojosa?
Estrada Hinojosa is our financial advisor. We do not pay them a fee for being our advisor through our general fund budget. It's allocated when they have a refunding or issue debt. So our investment advisor is Patterson and Associates. Okay. We also have other departments. So, for example, the security department. Again, there's increased needs in what the security department has, or I'm sorry, is requesting. The communications department, at the last board meeting, we added the cloud on our curriculum dashboard. So this is a new item for the 18-19 budget, which we're including here. And then when our property values increase, so do the fees that we pay for our tax collection. So I'm estimating a $30,000 increase for our tax collection. But again, that's due to our property taxes. I'm sorry, yes, our local tax collections increasing. Oh, it is in here. It's not, there it is. Ah, okay, so we do have a summary at a functional level. Again, this summary is pending the operations workshop. It's pending, as we were discussing earlier, any new positions. It's pending different items, but this is just a summary of what was presented today at a functional level. And again, the only reason there's a difference in, oh, God, I can't see the mouse. Well, the only difference, there's a difference in, there's the mouse, in by having two tax rates is if we have our tax ratification election, you could see that under function 71, our $4 million of debt is included in here. So again, this is to show where the debt would be included, but you can also see under function 51 where on fiscal year 2020, we would start to see the savings from the ESCO project. So if you look at fiscal year 2019 under function 51, we're looking at 10.2 million, and in year 2020, we're looking at 8.8. Same for if we were to do the tax ratification election. So the only difference between both is the the debt that we would pay under general fund if we did the tax ratification election. Are there any questions?
Board members? Questions?
Okay. Oh, this one does not look pretty. Well, this slide was supposed to be before the other slide, but I apologize for that. So under operations, again, electricity, we currently have a budget of 1.7 million, and that's what we're projecting for next year. And on that, in that budget is where in the year 2020 we would see savings. We do have the ESCO project that we've added. The facilities department, based on their current trend in expenses, are requesting an increase. Again, as we mentioned earlier, we removed the sustainability plan because it will be presented under operations and technology. The technology department and our telephone, transportations, and water, you can see that there is increases based on what they're trending. But that slide should have been before the functional category. I will now continue to discuss the tax ratification election. Are there any questions on the general fund expenses or recommendations on how to present this the next time?
Board members, any questions? No.
Okay. No. We have here a history of our interest and sinking tax rate. And again, in 16-17, we were at 11.98. In 17-18, we're at 11.98. And in 18-19, we would be at 1198. So it's 0.1198. This is the tax rate that we're requesting, or I'm sorry, that we have been proposing, that if we did a tax ratification election, it would really benefit the district on revenues. So again, by switching the tax rate, the district would receive more funding under state aid. So you can see the two charts where the M&O tax rate of $1.04. This is I say exactly, but this is what we are currently at. But at $1.15, our state funding would increase because, again, the state equalizes you for the taxes that you collect. Now, on local tax collections, you can see an increase here from 19 to 21. Again, that is not an increase in the tax rate. That's simply us moving the pennies over to general fund, so then those dollars aren't collected in debt service anymore. So again, this isn't an increase in tax rate. It's just where the tax rate is reflected, and that revenue is reflected there as well. There's two things that I wanted to point out. Is down here we have what the INS revenue would look like if we did a tax ratification election. We do have a fund balance in INS, which that fund balance can be used to pay our debt. So again, we would take advantage of that in the year 2020, knowing that that year is a year also that the state would reduce our funding. So we do have that proposed here as a model to show that we can use our fund balance to pay for that debt as well, our tax debt, or our INS debt. Are there any questions? Did I miss anything here? Okay, now this is where we come to the end. This is the first slide that we started the presentation off with, where we talked about having the tax ratification election, what that would look like. We've discussed each of the categories, where we've discussed the changes in revenue. We've discussed the proposed expenditures. The items that are highlighted are the items that would require discussions and recommendations from the Board of Trustees related to the general pay increase, related to stipends, new positions, the substitute rate, the tax ratification election. Again, I just really want to point out that if you could please keep in mind that in the year 1920, based on the data that we have right now for calculating funding, with the increase in local tax in taxable values in this tax appraisal year, next year the state would reduce their funding. Again, and the reason I mention that is because any recurring expenses that we decide on would affect how our 1920 school year budget would look like as well. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes.
run this by one more time.
Uh-huh.
If we're not increasing taxes, but our tax rate last year was 1.04
For general fund.
for general fund,
Mm-hmm.
what is it gonna be next year? If we're not increasing taxes, our general fund would be 1.1598.
The total tax rate for the district is 1.1598. It's broken up into two categories.
Okay.
$1.04 for general fund and 0.1198 for INS.
Okay.
However, the state pays you more for those INS pennies, so the tax ratification election would just be to reclassify where those pennies are.
So what are the taxpayers paying?
Their tax rate would not change.
They're still paying right now 1.1598.
There currently is 1.1598, yes, ma'am.
So I think that's where the misconception is, because we keep hearing 1.04 as the tax rate, and then
For
we
general
hear,
fund.
right.
Mhm.
So, okay, that's just a clarification.
And if you look at this slide, ma'am, we have the tax rate of $1.04 up here for general fund. But then down here, you can see the tax rate for INS at 0.1198. So those two make up the 1.1598. Correct. So we have that here on the slides, but when we're referring to general fund, I just have to make sure that we're discussing it in how it affects general fund.
Thank you.
This, Ms. Webb, this is why I was recommending, because the same questions that you have, the community has, since word gets out.
Well, that's why I asked, because people
And-
see 1.04 and then they see 1.1598, and you're going like, well, we're not increasing.
Yeah. And this is why I suggest, if we are gonna take that path, for us to have maybe a public forum somewhere where we can explain to the general public before we start using funds on this election, for us to explain to the community and so they can understand what's actually happening, that it's really not an increase. We're just shifting from one to the other. And I think they would be more apt to buy into it for it to pass if and when we decide to go that route.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, because if I see what you have up there right now, and I look at the M&O tax rate, it's 1.04. And then next to it, you still have M&O tax rate, 1.1598.
That's where the TRE is.
Right, exactly.
No, by all means, I mean, we do have to make it known to the public, what this is, because it is somewhat confusing, but there certainly would be a time for involvement of community members. Dr. Rios?
Yes, sir, I have a question where we would need direction from the board. If we were to do the TRE, we have to set the tax rate in August. Administration would absolutely move full force ahead after August and have a whole lot of training sessions, present to the different organizations, have different community forums where they could come in. But in visiting with Mr. Contreras, earlier he was asking, can we do something ahead of time just to get a general feel from the public as to where they would stand on something like this. And if the board wishes, we have presentations that we shared with our teachers, and I believe that they were successful in understanding what the TRE is. But we could create opportunities to share this with the public at different areas and get their feedback on it. If the board would like for us to do that, we'll brainstorm different areas to present, including here at the SPC, and see if there was interest from the public in coming out to see it.
Yeah, I think that would be, that would be great, because just the same as Ms. Webb was questioning, because there is when you first look at it, it seems like there will be an increase, when in fact it's not. You're just moving from the INS to the M&O, and it stays the same. You're reallocating the funds, and that to the public would be it would be beneficial for them to understand that point, and it is not a tax increase, and that way we do get a feel and a glimpse of how the public's going to react before we actually start using funds to run this tax election.
And then also, we need to indicate if this is to occur and it moves forward, and we do get extra funds into the district, where and how are they going to be utilized? That is a major concern.
Yes, ma'am. If you notice, there highlighted in yellow, a big piece of that is under the operations and technology plan and the salary increase. And that's why it's important that we get some feedback from the board. Of course, we still need to present the operations, and that workshop isn't until...
It's at the end of July, I think the 30th. I have it here.
Yeah, that's correct, because the next one is on
Health insurance.
health
yes.
insurance.
And then we have a board meeting, and then the 30th of July is the operations and technology workshop.
Now, the one on health insurance, that's not going to be that long of a presentation. We could do the health insurance and the operations on the same day to get some feedback from the board and include in that presentation.
Okay.
But the them presenting health insurance shouldn't take more than 40 minutes. And the operations, the plan that Mr. Henge prepared, shouldn't take but another 45 minutes, and we'll definitely provide it ahead of time. If we can combine those two, Mr. Mesa, it would allow the board an earlier opportunity to give us feedback and inform the public some preliminary direction. Because when we made, Ms. Webb, there's a lot of wisdom in her comment. The teachers did ask, how would this money be used? And we indicated that obviously it would go to fund some of their increases in salary and health benefits. But beyond that, there's some operations needs that we need.
Dr. Rios, like I mentioned earlier, as part of that critical needs assessment team back in 2017, would you be able to provide or bring back so we can see what the committee identified as the critical needs? And I think it would be beneficial also for our next budget to see what we can start chipping away at.
We'll make it part of the operations presentation. And we'll indicate what's going to be covered with the 1.8 million, what's going to be covered from the 2.42 from fund balance that was allocated. So we'll definitely clarify those items, sir.
I think I know we have a lot to digest with today's meeting in regard to salaries and so forth, but if it is the wish of the board to combine these two and give us some time, then we can do it if it's going to be feasible.
Yes, sir.
We don't have
I believe it
much-
would
That
be.
would be great.
Okay,
Yeah, that would
let's
be.
combine those two, and then we can provide some feedback to administration.
When this sheet that worksheet that is there, what we're going to do in the interim is just provide different scenarios on what it would look like if we did a 1.8 all the way up to 2.4 or even a 2.8, what it would look like, and just offer different variants on stipends and different increases on substitutes. I know that the board would like for us to do everything at once, but it might be difficult to provide all of the stipend increases and all the substitute increases. And it's difficult to do a 2.8% increase and remove the salary cap all at once. So we'll provide different options for the board to start considering. And that way, when we get to approving the final budget, there'll just be some clarity as to why we're going in that direction. And kind of make it like a live worksheet where we can change some things around based on the different options that we gave. Because I think that if we look at the numbers, we see that as much as the board would like to do for the employees in the community, it's just not going to be feasible to do everything. And what our recommendations would be, and like I said, at the very end, it'll be an interactive worksheet, and we can come up with a conclusion and do that.
Just as long as we are ready to make decisions in regard to everything that's highlighted, for example, security at the elementaries and so forth. And you're going to have to make those decisions. We'll combine the next two then.
Okay, and that way, if we need to have the additional ones just to iron out
Mhm.
what the wishes of the board are, given all the information, we can definitely do that. And we'll set up some presentations to get some feedback on the TRE. I think that what we'll do is we'll set up a general presentation here. I really believe that that'll have limited participation, even though we'll advertise. And then we'll just recommend a couple of areas to make the presentation, maybe Rotary, or some of these groups, and get feedback from them.
I think, I don't know, advertise, and I hope we get a good response, because, and we do, just do a media blast all over, whether it's newspaper, Facebook, all over, so we can get a good response, so we can get a good feel of what the people feel about, how they feel about it.
We'll work with Mr. Luna and Sandra Hernandez to make sure that we get it to all the media outlets.
Channel 39, what's it called? 1301, was it now?
Yes, absolutely, on Channel 1301 and the newspaper,
Website.
Facebook, everywhere else that Mr. Luna has access to. And we'll set a date and then move forward.
And in the meantime, could you provide information for Mr. Contreras in regard to the critical needs that were identified by the
Other prior citizens committees.
Facilities Committee?
Yes, sir, and we'll make that part of the presentation for that workshop as well.
Okay.
Now, I'm sorry, sir, Mr. Henge is on vacation this week, and next week, though, the district is closed. But I'll see if Ms. Hernandez has access to those files, and maybe we can provide something by this weekend. If not, that's why.
No problem.
Okay.
Again, we will update the board workshops to include the change for July 16th. And I did include some resources, so I will email these out to you. Again, if you're interested in reading, the Financial Accountability Systems Resource Guide is the guidance for school districts. It's about 800 pages on coding. But the Foundation School Program, which is what I was talking about today, is how the state, bless you, how the state funds school districts. The Financial Integrity Rating System of Texas is also how our school district is rated. Our financial transparency webpage includes a lot of information, of our historical information. But the school finance and legislative update from Moat Casey is what I was referring to as what they were anticipating would be discussed at the upcoming legislative sessions.
Do we have any loans or anything that we can look back and renegotiate on the interest rates? Do we keep track?
Yes, sir. We have a maturity date on each one of those bonds, and as soon as they become available for refinance, our Estrella Hinojosa, our financial advisor, is immediately advising of those up to a year in advance.
Correct.
And also for the benefit of the board members, the function codes were provided in some of those.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah. And then I look at those critical areas of adding staff, and then the question marks in regard to everything from the positions requested or additional positions requested. And then, of course, we still need some other information in regard to the requests that were made. But I think we need to look at all those areas very critically so that we are able to make a decision in the coming months.
Well, I really thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And there being no other items on the agenda,
Mr.
I will-
Overfeld.
I just wanted
Mr.
to
Overfeld.
say thank you, Ms. Valdez, and then also Board President, I've already discussed with you, I will be out for that third workshop, but if, as a request, if administration, whatever you put in here, if there's a way to PDF it to me, because I'll have electronic communication, that way I can look at it, and if I have the ability, I'll watch it live while y'all are doing, and then I can submit questions to you or Dr. Rios there while I'm out. That way I don't, even though I won't physically be here, I'll at least know what was going on.
Sure, we could do that. Any other questions or reminders? Then, there being no other items on the agenda, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. There's a motion, Mr. Overfeld, seconded by Ms. Gonzalez. All those in favor indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And good night, people.